Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying their lunch. My name is Klaudia Czerwińska, and it is my great pleasure to be hosting today's discussion. Usually I represent TVP World, as you can see, the International Service of the Polish Public Broadcaster, TVP. But today I'm the moderator of this discussion that I'm going to have with my guest, Kajsa Ollongren, EU Special Representative for Human Rights, but also former Dutch politician, former Minister of the Interior, and former Deputy Prime Minister, as well as Minister of Defense in the years of 2022 and 2024, an important period for Europe and for the world. Today's Brown Bag Lunch is our opportunity to speak about important subjects in a slightly less formal environment, obviously enjoying the beautiful mountains and the beautiful day. So let's start with the subject of today. The main question, are Europeans ready for war? I can hardly think of a better question, especially considering the climate, not only on our continent, but also in different places of the world. So just a quick word. What is your answer to this question? Do you think that the Europeans are ready for war?
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for that difficult question, to which there is, I don't think, a very simple answer. And I am, though, glad to be here and to be able to comment on it. And thanks you all for coming. You look especially beautiful against this amazing backdrop. I've never seen anything like it, and I do hope that you enjoy it as well. Is Europe ready for war? Well, the honest answer is that Europe's not ready for war, but that it should be. Because if there is one thing we have learned from the war in Ukraine, the large-scale war since the invasion in 2022, but also the war that's already been ongoing much longer than that, and other, let's say, war-type activities that the Russian Federation has undertaken even inside countries in the European Union, should have created an atmosphere in which we are preparing for war, because we all know if you want peace, you must be ready for war. And I would say there are two reasons why we're not. And the first reason is, and I say this in my former capacity as the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands, the first reason is that we're simply not ready in terms of our military. Many European countries are in NATO. Sweden and Finland joined because of the threat of Russia. But NATO has for a very long time relied a lot on the United States, and we all know that that is now also, let's say, jeopardized. So in a military sense, we depend on the United States for many capacities that we don't have, strategic enablers, but also in the high-tech side, we're not there yet. So we need time on the European side to prepare in a military sense. But perhaps more importantly, and this I say also in my current capacity as EU for the Special Representative for the EU for Human Rights, I don't think that the people in Europe really are aware of the risk we're facing. I think we have built something what's very beautiful in Europe, the European Union, which is a peace project, and it's very successful because the countries inside the European Union and also our neighboring countries wishing to join the European Union, they're not going to go at war against each other. And that's a great achievement. But while we were building this, we seem to have forgotten about outside threats to us, which is why you need a strong defense and why you need a sense among our populations of that democracy, every freedom that we enjoy it's not a force of nature. It needs be taken care of. And that is why you also ultimately need to be ready to defend it with force, if necessary. And there, I think, we're not there yet. People think that we are preparing to help Ukraine, or we are preparing to defend in Ukraine. But what we really need to prepare for is that we actually have to engage in a war against a country which has completely different standards, especially when it comes to those freedoms that we so much value in Europe. So in that sense, no.
I think it also comes to the understanding of the mentality of Russia, for example, something that's been an issue in the past, especially when it comes to Europe, understanding that Russia in this particular scenario is the aggressor. And as we're talking about those elements that all collectively come together when it comes to the question that we're asking ourselves today, because we are all a civil society, we're asking ourselves if we, in fact, are ready to take on the challenge of having a larger conflict, the conflict that is currently taking place in Ukraine spilling over. So it's important to have this division. I separated it into 3 separate groups: the civil society aspect. So for example, conscription, combat readiness, willingness to fight for the country, which is also a great question for many of us, and lack of the civil protection planning, as well as political aspect, international relations, cooperation, and military aspect. So I would like us to take a look at those 3 groups, and I would like us to start with the civil society, but because you spoke about the mentality of the Europeans, are we actually ready? But also we need to talk about, for example, let's start with the conscription. How does a country introduce a new conscription model? We know that some of the countries already have some sort of a conscription in different capacities when it comes to national militaries. But how would a country in Europe today, in this architecture of peace, the peace project that you mentioned, is going to tell young people, like all of us included here, that we need to start getting ready for the conflict?
Yes, that's of course extremely important, and I think we also have to acknowledge that we are, every country has a different tradition, and there are countries, for instance, Finland, they never got rid of the conscription, so they still have it, and they have a very strong reserve force of people, mainly men, because it's only male conscription, who can be immediately mobilized. And that's a model I think we should look at. We also have other countries, especially also in Northern Europe, that have not conscription, but sort of a voluntary conscription. So every 17, 18-year-old gets the opportunity to enroll in the military, and it's seen as something that adds value to the person, also to what you are going to do after you have done this military conscription. I think that's interesting. In Austria, you can choose. You do either military conscription or you do civil society conscription. So you do civic duty. And I think that's also very interesting because you offer a choice if you don't feel comfortable doing the military conscription. There are so many things you can do to contribute to society and keeping society secure and safe. So, and that is, I think, that many countries are finding their way in what fits them, what fits their culture, what fits their political system. But we are past, I think, the exit of not doing anything. And I think we also have to be stronger from the European side, from the NATO side, that if you want to contribute, we cannot accept the way that it is now. You have to be able to do more. And that means involving young people. At the same time, I think we also have to learn, for instance, from Ukraine. Ukraine is very careful about their very young people because they know they're also the future of the country. And both are true. Personally, I think on conscription, if you look at, we've done research in many countries on are people, would people voluntarily enter or be mobilized if a war were to occur? In many countries, that it's very low. So it seems...
It comes to the question of willingness,
exactly.
Whether people feel like they feel the need
yes.
to join and actually fight for their rights, for their freedoms, for democracy, and for having a stable, peaceful life.
Yes, and the question is, can you really answer that question when there is not that situation? And I think you would have a different outcome once people really feel the threat. And then it all boils down to, do those in these positions of responsibility, are they clear enough towards their own population about the threats and the risks we are facing? Mm-hmm. Because I think we need to increase that sense of urgency, and I believe, firmly believe, that will also increase the let's say the urge among also young people to actually step up and engage.
Another big question that relates directly to the economy and military is how do we explain to people who are paying their taxes that their taxes will have to go into more military spending, something that they can't quite yet see, and hopefully they won't have to, but something that is incredibly important, especially with, for example, this push for the 2035 5% GDP spending on defense. How do we explain to people who are paying their bills and they have to pay their taxes where these taxes are going to?
Well, it's a question you could ask in Poland, and people are apparently happy with it because you're already almost there.
Poland is quite particular
yes.
as well because we always understand the sort of danger that comes from Russia. So I feel there's also a slight difference in mentality.
And I agree, but I think we should learn from that mentality, and the same goes for the Baltic states or Finland, for instance. I think we are now all raising our levels. We have agreed to the 5%, which is really 3.5% if you look at it very closely, but it's a big step for many countries. And it is true, either you raise the taxes or you cut budgets elsewhere, or you borrow the money. And what we probably will see is going to be a little bit of all of these options. And it depends on the country and the political choices that countries will make, how people will feel it. And I think it's interesting that also many frugal countries who were previously very, very cautious when it came to the European budget, for instance, like Germany or Finland or Denmark, they've all changed their positions because they say, you know, defense and security is so important, it's so vital, it's so fundamental. So if we have to do joint borrowing, we will do that. Because future generations will benefit from that we do this investment now. And if we don't do it, it's becoming even more difficult and also more expensive. And frankly, I think that is the right way forward. And I do hope also in my own country that we will make that choice eventually.
Another important subject when we talk about the civil society and we talk about this peace project, and as you said yourself, if you want to have peace, you need to know war. And that's a very important point because will Europe have to actually fight and in that fight compromise some of its values? You're in the human rights sector. Do you think that our commitment to human rights will have to change if we are to fight off the aggressor?
No, because I think that Ukraine is fighting off the aggressor right now. And it is Russia that is not complying with international humanitarian law. It's not Ukraine. Ukraine is defending itself. If we were in some way, either as part of security guarantees, which I hope, because if those are put in place, that means that there is a ceasefire and eventually perhaps real peace for Ukraine, then we will not compromise on our principles. If we were to enter a war, it would mean that we are under attack. And also there, same rules apply. We need to defend ourselves.
So from that subject, let's move to the political aspect, which is also important, international relations and cooperation reliance. If you were to become an almighty president of the European Union, what do you think would actually win us this fight against Russia right now? What would be the steps that we would have to take when it comes to foreign relations, when it comes to unity here in Europe, but also outside of Europe, to be able to achieve that goal?
Well, I think you just mentioned the word, it's unity. I think it's all about unity. If we are united as Europeans, European countries, it's not only the European Union, of course, that's a strong force, but it's the European countries that unite, then we are very, very strong. But we lack that unity, and we all know what the problems are. There are certain countries with certain governments that break the unity, and there are always national interests that seem to be top of mind when we should look at the European interest and the European security. So I think unity is vital. I think we have shown sort of a maximum of unity when it comes to Ukraine. I think we can be slightly more optimistic since the last meeting in Washington, where Europe was represented by a very relevant group of European leaders who displayed unity in a very strong sense, I think. But at the same time, you see also that the dependence, like I said, on the United States, and the lack of understanding sometimes in the United States of what Europe really is, does not help us very much. But slowly we have increased our support to Ukraine. We have taken over from the Americans. We are building on our own defenses. And I think we have become much more serious about considering the possibility that in the future we might have to be able to defend ourselves without the United States.
When we're looking at the European Union and when we're looking at the subject of unity, we also have some of the member states that seem to have quite a particular sentiment when it comes to Russia. For example, let's look at Hungary. How would you say European Union and Europe as a continent could overcome that challenge of having a member state that is playing in both fields?
Well, I would say in the case of Hungary, it's really the government. So I wouldn't say that the Hungarians as a people are always.
Obviously, it's
exactly
the question of government.
It's government. So and Hungary is not the only country. There are other countries that also are less favorable to the position that the European Union has taken, and we may even fear that this number of countries is increasing as elections give certain outcomes. So it's a threat to us, and so is the fact that these often populist parties feed into the fear that people have. They will feed into the fear that we are actually provoking Russia, which is completely untrue. But it's part of their narrative, it's part of their propaganda, it's part of the disinformation they're sending out through all channels to people. So that's really a big concern. And at the same time, I do believe that democracy itself and the fact that we have these debates and the possibilities to challenge each other is our strength. It is really, if you go to Ukraine, I've been there 8-9 times in the last 2.5 years, one of the things they're fighting for is, Europe. It is being part of the European family. It's being sharing our values, and that's incredible. I mean, you see a lot of European Union flags flying in Ukraine. And so sometimes when you're on the outside, you see much better than when you're on the inside what the European Union really offers to people, also to individual people. So while this is simply a fact of life, we are a union of 27 separate countries with separate political systems. But we have to make sure that we move in the right direction, and therefore we need political leadership and political will.
When we talk about the aspect of international relations and that unity, the concept of unity, we need to stress the importance of our relationship as the European continent with the US, especially after the change in administration that happened. You mentioned that Europe would have to learn how to be more self-reliant and how to fight its own fight without such a large support from the United States. Do you think that there is some sort of a gray area when it comes to that relationship with the United States, where it is still possible to have a close military but also political relationship with the United States to be able to protect the continent and to protect the values that we all share?
I hope so. But at the same time, I mean, this is the second Donald Trump administration, and we should not be naive. So even after Donald Trump, we might not be in a better place. And that's why I feel that we have lost time as European countries during the Biden administration, where we sort of were hopeful that things were back to normal and would stay there. But they're not. And it's not only Trump, and it's not only MAGA, and it's not only that movement. It's also the assessment that the United States for a very long period of time has had, that Europe's become less important to them, and China and the Indo-Pacific region has become more important to them. So the outlook from Washington is not only towards us, is also towards the other side. And I think I understand that. If you see how China is developing, it has a very long-term strategy. It is extremely present all around the world, especially in Africa, but also in the Middle East. And I think we should be on the same side as the United States when it comes to China and the Indo-Pacific. But also that is becoming increasingly more difficult. So we should leave that naive idea behind us that things will return to how they were. And we have to live with the reality that they might never return to where we were, and that we have to be hopefully within NATO. I mean, I think still NATO is the strongest military alliance in the world, and it's very helpful to have the Americans in there. But we have to be able to take care of our own security within that framework, and if worse comes to worse, also without that framework.
Ironically, many experts seem to be pointing in a direction of President Trump actually pushing Europe to the goal of spending 5% of GDP by 2035 by simply saying, listen, us as the US, we're done protecting your continent. Now you need to put your own skin in the game. What is your opinion on that statement, that it was actually Donald Trump who pushed Europe to understand that it needs to spend more on defense?
Well, I think it was certainly helpful to give him the credit for it. That's, I think, one of the reasons that the summit in The Hague was a success. And he certainly has pushed us, but he's not been the only one to do that. Previous administrations and previous American presidents have said exactly the same thing, and not with the same result. So I think it's a combination of Trump being, very black and white, so saying that if you don't do this, I won't do that. But it's also our assessment of our security situation that we're in. It's our assessment of, like I said, when Sweden and Finland joined, because they simply do not trust Putin. They
and
do not trust Russia.
We have some voices coming from Austria, that is not a NATO member, of possibly considering actually joining the alliance at one point.
Well, it would be very interesting. As I understand it, Austria always says we're neutral, but we're not indifferent. And if you're in the European Union, you cannot be completely neutral because you share the values.
And yet they're doubling and tripling the defense spending, which is also important to remember.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think on the other hand, a country like Iceland is now seriously considering membership of the European Union. Who knows, maybe Norway might reconsider their position on the European Union. So the more we unite in both organizations, the stronger we will be.
And how do you think this growth, when it comes to those unions, those alliances, is actually going to make Vladimir Putin react? Because that's another part of the equation that probably is sometimes overlooked, but it's important to mention.
Yes, and he will, publicly, he will simply ignore it. He will simply sort of act as if it doesn't have any relevance at all, as if we're weak and as if we're not united. But I think, inside the Kremlin, this, of course, is not welcomed. The strong unity that we showed when Ukraine was invaded, the very strong military support that we're giving to Ukraine, the discussion that we're unfortunately still having, and I hope we will conclude it, about the frozen assets. These are things that really hurt in Moscow. The sanctions, look at the Russian economy. They cannot sustain this forever. And the sanctions that the European Union has put in place, and also our neighboring countries like the UK, they hurt the Russian economy. So I think, that's why he was so happy to go to Alaska and to have the red carpet treatment and everything, because he, again, was a player on the international arena. But he cannot enter the European Union. He is completely frozen out of every structure that we have. He is a pariah as far as we're concerned, and I think he should stay that way because besides everything, and I do hope for ceasefire and peace in Ukraine, we should not forget the accountability side of things. Putin is responsible for war crimes, and we cannot compromise on that.
And what is your response to a statement that Europe could potentially already be in a state of war with Russia, but from the hybrid perspective? I mean, we've seen hybrid attacks happening daily in all parts of not only Europe as a union, but also Europe as a continent.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things we need to talk about more, and people need to understand what threat that poses to them in their daily lives. Hybrid attacks, cyber attacks. We are dealing with a country, and by the way, also other countries that are aligned to Russia, like North Korea, like Iran, who are doing the same things, who have the technology, who have the knowledge, who can really harm us. And that we think of war in sort of a hot war situation like the war we're seeing in Ukraine now doesn't mean that these cyber attacks are not acts of war. And I do believe they are, as is violating our airspace regularly with drones, as is killing people in our countries. So I would say we are, well, if not at war, we are definitely in the gray zone.
So let's jump into the final aspect of this conversation, so the military aspect, something that, as we've mentioned in our conversation before, is important. It's more visible. We can definitely feel it when it comes to paying taxes and the military spending. We hear about that all the time, especially with a series of meetings that have taken place over the past few weeks and months. And I would like to bring some data from the European Council of Foreign Relations, because that's something that gives hope, I think, when it comes to the military aspect. At first sight, Europe has the means to defend itself. European NATO allies and EU member states together outspent Russia 4-1 on defense in 2023. Their combined military forces are larger than those of Russia or the US, and European defense industries produce some of the most advanced weapon systems around, with 5 European countries among the top 10 global arms exporters. Last but not least, Europe's GDP is 10 times larger than that of Russia, second only to that of the US. So this definitely brings some hope. Do you think that Europe has the means right now, as we're looking at those numbers, as we're looking at this data, to not be afraid? Because that not only comes to the government and the military, but also all of us here. After all, we're struggling to maintain peace. That affects all of us.
Yeah. Well, I like those figures. They're important. It's true. Also, the Russian economy is really nothing. I always say it's Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands combined, and that's it. And so that's not a lot. And our arms industry, our defense industry, is strong and is becoming stronger. And we have this partnership with the United States, so we are strong. However, and I say this as a former defense minister, our readiness is not very high. So to sustain a war like the way Ukraine has been doing that now is going to be very difficult for the European countries.
So what do we do? Where do we move? What steps do we take?
Yeah, what steps do we take? We continue to support Ukraine in every possible way. We arm ourselves, we strengthen our defense in a smart way, which means we have to work much more together. We have to stop this idea of doing everything ourselves nationally. We have to join forces, we have to do joint procurement, we have to invest in the same type of capabilities. We cannot accept this huge fragmentation that we have all across the alliance and all across Europe. And that we also get more bang for our bucks, which would appeal to the taxpayers. So I think also there we need to show unity. So continue to strengthen Ukraine, continue to strengthen NATO, and really cooperate, really do everything together. And there I come back to this issue of political will. We have to explain this to our voters, we have to explain this to our parliaments, and we have to overcome that feeling of sort of we can defend our own country. And I used to say, you know, the Dutch border is not the border with Germany that we should worry about. It's the border with Belarus in Lithuania, because
and
that
it's the
is
question
where
of
our
the eastern
troops are.
flank.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something that the Baltic states and Poland understand very well, because there is also that slight danger, especially with the Zapad military exercises between Russia and Belarus taking place right now, when it comes to what happens next, when it comes to Belarus. Because let's remember that Alexander Lukashenko is also pretty good friends with Vladimir Putin, to say the least, and there is also a danger from that side as well. We've seen some elements of hybrid warfare when it comes to that border, both in the case of Poland as well as the Baltic states. When it comes to spending, that's something very important. You mentioned that when we take those steps in safeguarding Europe and safeguarding the continent and maintaining peace, we have to focus on providing support for Ukraine, but at the same time working on our own military environment. How do we do that in terms of the economy? How do we do that in terms of knowing that we can maintain a steady flow of support for Ukraine, at the same time preparing ourselves for the potential danger? I mean, only about a few weeks ago, we heard that we might be 2 years away from this conflict spilling over.
You know, I think that now that we are increasing our defense budgets, this is possible. Right? It's not. It used to be a question of we have too little money, too little budget to make choices. Now we have the budget, and we have to make the right choices. And the right choices are joint procurement, also, you know, huge investments in innovations and new technologies. So resist what I think many also in the military want to do is to buy the things from the past. It doesn't make any sense at all to, you know, invest large scale in tanks when the future is unmanned. It doesn't make any sense to invest in even more F-35s when also there technology will change everything. We really have to learn from the war in Ukraine. It's quite amazing. You cannot even imagine the number of drones that are being used by both sides. It has changed completely the front line. And that is what we have to prepare for, which is also one of the things that worry me, actually, because we don't have that combat experience. None of us have it. Only Ukraine has it. So Ukraine is going to be a very important partner in the future, once there is peace, hopefully, for us to learn from. Because if we're going to face a war, it's going to be something completely different. For what we have fought wars of what we call wars of choice, which is an unfortunate term, I think, but in Afghanistan or in Iraq, but nothing of the kind that we're seeing now in Ukraine.
When we talk about the military, we also have to think about the armament. Are we going to produce more domestically? Is Europe, actually, European member countries, are they ready to produce at home to be able to sustain it? I mean, we have some flow of munitions coming from different countries across the globe. We have different parts that are being brought over to Europe in order to create weapons. But do we have the right backyard, so to speak, to be able to sustain ourselves in a situation of conflict?
Well, I think it is more interesting for the European countries to invest the increased budget in European industries, not exclusively, but to increase the production inside Europe. Will also bring jobs to our countries. It will also be an investment in these new technologies. It will also be an investment in talent in our universities and our innovation infrastructure. So I think it's extremely important to do that. And I think it's more interesting to do that than to buy more in the United States, where they're actually having the same problems as we have. Enormous lines for their production facilities. You have to wait for years until you get the capabilities or even ammunition and missiles that you order. And I think you see now, you know, countries that step up and pay for the American weapons that are being provided to Ukraine. It's more interesting to buy them off our own industry. So I think it's an opportunity.
Another big question that I feel is at the back of our heads here, and people across the globe, is the question of the nuclear deterrent and the weapons of mass destruction. This is something, a subject that's been looming over this whole discussion about what happens next when it comes to Russia, when it comes to this conflict possibly spilling over. We know that Russian nuclear arsenal is large. We also know that France in Europe is one of the countries that is possible to extend the nuclear umbrella to other countries. There were talks over the past weeks and months when it comes to that. We know that the UK has a nuclear deterrent, which it shares with the US. But considering the situation with the US, do you think that we're going to see greater proliferation of the weapons of mass destruction across Europe as we are getting closer to what possibly could be a spilling over of a conflict with Russia?
Well, this is a very difficult topic. And I think, well, first of all, one of the last things that Russia did agree to before invading Ukraine was in the United Nations saying that, you know, a nuclear war cannot be won and should therefore never be fought. So, okay, we seem to agree on that.
And yet that's one of their cards that they're using
exactly
on a regular.
So the nuclear side of things has always been for deterrence. And during the Cold War, we sort of created an equilibrium on nuclear. And after that, we have started to try to go towards a world where we do not have nuclear weapons anymore. But we all know that we're very far off that mark and that things have not improved and that there was polarization already because there are countries in the world who have actually created their own nuclear weapons. So the proliferation was already there. and proliferation was already there. And I think that now, talking about, should Europe have its own nuclear possibilities like France has, the UK doesn't, because it is with the US, so they are largely interlinked to the US. They cannot decide on their own and deploy them on their own. I don't think that's a solution. However, I think we also have to acknowledge that the Russians, they have changed their nuclear posture, and we have not. And that is interesting. So perhaps carefully, and it will all happen behind closed doors, there could be a debate in NATO about the nuclear posture within Europe, which has been the same for decades, whereas Russia has pushed closer towards Europe, using Belarus as one of the places where they can deploy their nuclear weapons.
As I was having conversations in our Warsaw studio with our experts when it comes to the NATO alliance and Article 5, some of them pointed in the direction of Article 5 being a paper tiger. And we have different countries. For example, we have Mr. Babis of Czech Republic, who said he, for example, wouldn't defend Poland if it was attacked as of now by Russia. What is the strength? And what's the strength of Article 5? And would it actually work if it came to, for example, let's say the Baltic states being attacked? We know that there is a possibility of that happening. And we talk about it openly. So do you think it would work if it came to that?
Well, NATO is all about trust in what we have agreed upon. And Article 5 is, of course, very important if you look at what NATO really is all about. And I think what got us really worried was when Trump was not confirming the US commitment to Article 5. He has, however, and I think that's a very good step, he has reconfirmed it before and during the NATO summit in The Hague. And I think the US commitment to Article 5 is the most important. Of course, every ally has to commit to Article 5. But if the strongest, biggest and most important ally doesn't commit to it, then it will simply fall apart. So I think, and it doesn't matter where the attack occurs. So the Baltic states may be seen as sort of the most vulnerable state, but they're part of NATO, so they have to be able to rely on Article 5, as every other state. And we talked about the eastern flank. Of course, the eastern flank is most exposed, but at the same time, the port of Rotterdam is also reached within minutes with missiles. So we're all exposed, and we have to be able to rely on Article 5. And it's only been put to the test once when 9/11 happened. But then the response was firm, and let's hope that we will not have to test it again.
So we've arrived at the point in our discussion where I would like to give the microphone and give the stage to all of you who would be interested in asking questions. We have about a few minutes more for those, so there's going to be a microphone circling here. So if we could start with the gentleman at the front, let's have some questions.
Super, thank you for this discussion. It was very insightful. So I have a small note. We have talked about capabilities, but nothing about doctrines. And I think it is fair to know that tank was introduced by Britain in 1916, but effectively utilized only in 1940s by German in Blitzkrieg. So that's very important not to forget that doctrines and how do we prepare our doctrines to implement our capabilities? And the question is, so I don't believe in European rearmament, that it is possible in peaceful Europe due to political considerations. And it has never been possible before, and before First and Second World War. And resilience, in the most broad sense, that is converting civil business, civil society into the military one. And my question, is European business ready to be converted into military one?
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, and thank you also for your remark on the doctrine, because you're, of course, absolutely right, and that's one of my points also when we look at Ukraine. We have to adapt our doctrines, and not necessarily to, exactly the same situation as there is now in Ukraine, because probably also that will change. But being more agile in our approach is very important. I think many countries are preparing for this question. So we have seen how the Russians have been able to turn their economy into a war economy, but the way they do it is, of course, the way an autocracy does it. And as we are not autocracies in Europe, we will not do it that way. But as a minister, I've also had very interesting debates with industry, with the financial sector. And I think they were all eager to find ways to contribute to this. So the financial sector to do more investments in the armaments industry, which is really, really an issue. Previously, they didn't want to touch it. Now they see it as their duty to do more. And also the industries are eager to be part of this. And I think there it all comes down also to how can we create really a strong European industry. So it doesn't make any sense to start new ammunition factories in my countries where we have so many issues in a small country with lots of people. But there are other countries who we can invest in to increase the output of their productions, for instance, in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, who are much larger, of course. So to create those competitive advantages is extremely important to use them. And the second thing is I think we're very much lagging behind the United States in new technology and also in space. And we really need to step up our efforts, and not only US, by the way, also China. And we are more or less, I would say, in the third place, and that's not good enough. And I think we have very talented and smart people. We don't want them to go to the United States. We want them to stay in Europe and to build in Europe.
Thank you so much. Next question.
Good afternoon. As you can see, I'm a young man, and I'm one of those who are probably willing to defend Europe. But I'm worried that we are ideologically not prepared for this war. And what I mean with that is that, for example, last year, the German Bundestag passed a resolution against autonomous weapon systems. And as you said earlier, this is a very important aspect of how modern warfare is going to be fought. And I'm worried that the politicians are not willing to go the step out of the moral ivory tower, because if everyone else is doing it and we're the only ones not doing it, you'll be sending me against these autonomous weapon systems from the other side. And are you willing to leave your moral ivory tower to prevent sacrificing me tomorrow?
This is an extremely important topic, and I think that we have gone in a very steep learning curve when it comes to autonomous systems. And the whole idea 3 years ago that you always had to have sort of human control in the end over systems, we have to acknowledge that doesn't work. If we do that, then it will exactly what you say will happen. There will be a certain death for those who we sent in to combat. And we know it because in Ukraine, they also found out the hard way that once you spot the drone, you're dead. So autonomous systems are part of warfare. If we use them wisely, we will use them to make our military safer. And if we try to stay on the moral high ground or in the moral high ivory tower, we will be no game for the opponents who do not. So I do believe we have to try to continue to think this through. What does it mean? But we have to be able to fight with it. And we have to be able to use those autonomous systems to our advantage. Because if we don't, we might as well just put down everything.
Thank you for this powerful question. The lady here at the front, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question about hybrid threats. I know Europe is coming together and has responses to these threats and is making efforts, but is it fast enough? Are we progressing quickly enough? Are we having the right responses?
Well, the problem with these hybrid threats is that our approach used to be we first have to be absolutely sure what has happened and who is responsible, etc. That takes a lot of time. And by then, the public has already forgotten about it. It wasn't a disaster. Nobody really felt the effects of the hybrid attack. So I think some politicians have now started turning that around. And they have said, of course, we investigate and we have our independent judiciary to do all of that. But if we see an attack, cyber, for instance, or a cable that's been cut, or a satellite that has lost contact, we should perhaps just say what we think it is, because we know that the Russians use these methods. We know that this is really everyday business for them. So let's name it, let's call it out, and maybe once or twice, we might be wrong. But the other 8 times out of 10, we're right. And that way, we will show people what is actually happening. And I think they don't have the full picture right now.
Thank you. Let's have the lady in the 3rd row, please.
Thank you so much. You talked lots about the collaboration and the unity that's needed in Europe. So what do you think about a united European army? And both from an ideological perspective, but also on a practical level, would that ever actually work?
Yeah, but it's become really, in some countries at least, a sort of a political debate. Should we have a European army or not? But we don't really have a NATO army. NATO is also an alliance of countries where countries contribute, and if you contribute, it's a national decision to do so. But you have signed up to do it. So in that sense, I mean, European army already exists because we do European missions, we do European deployments where you have an EU flag on your uniform. So I think I'm a practical person. So the goal for me would be to cooperate, and the goal for me would be that we are able to achieve a higher readiness of European countries that cooperate together. And I think most military would also confirm that this is exactly what we need, because none of us can go on our own, and none of us do go on our own. We always go in coalitions. So we are working towards cooperation, which is not to say that there will be a European army controlled by some kind of European entity that doesn't really exist. So I think that is where the national sovereignty comes in, and that is very important to people. So we should perhaps just keep that and focus on the cooperation.
Thank you. Let's have the gentleman there in the back row.
Hello, thank you very much. I teach Europe and peace mediation at the College of Europe, so I'm very interested in this. Where is the narrative around peace and Europe as a peace project? I'd just like to ask you how you see it in terms of the fears that others have outside Europe, because when they hear the ECFR recently said Europe should be a war project, I find that very troubling, because what other people hear is that Europe is going to abandon its commitments to being a peaceful actor on the world stage, to prevent violent conflict, is going to rearm, and we're going to solve disputes through force and not through peaceful means. And the idea that we demonize the other, I mean, Russians have human rights too, yeah? So your remark about Hungarians, well, Orban says one thing, but the Hungarians still deserve respect, and Russians have their human rights. And how do we build these bridges? And should we abandon Europe as a peace project? Or should we do Europe as a peace project and a war project? Or what do you think?
It ties to this the question of human rights that we had at the very beginning of our discussion here. So thank you for the question.
No, it's an excellent question. And I must say, I'm not sure that presenting Europe as a war project is very helpful. But what could be helpful is to say that to underline the success of the European Union as a peace project, but also that it comes at a price. And that it is not, if you look at history, the post-World War II period is exceptional for European countries, not for the rest of the world, but for European countries, really exceptional. There have been wars, of course, on the Balkans, for instance, so in Europe, close to Europe, but not on the scale that we're seeing now in Ukraine. And I think so underlining that if we want to keep that, then we have to be stronger on defense, especially if we cannot rely on the United States to come and help us. And by the way, we don't want war. We're trying to avoid war, which is always why we spoke about deterrence. The deterrence has to be strong enough for malign actors like Russia not to attack us. That is the whole purpose, I think, also of NATO and also of all of our armed forces inside of Europe. So the only thing I fear is that we have sort of forgotten that peace is not normal and that war is really, over history and over time, the more natural state of affairs, that countries go into war with one another. And that is exactly what is happening now. So that is the question we have to answer what is our contribution to stopping the war in Ukraine, to making the world a more peaceful place, and to understanding that all the freedoms that we enjoy in Europe are also not, if you look at global at the world, only I think 20%, 25% of people live in democracies. There are so many countries that are facing instability, unrest, war in the rest of the world, that we cannot remain this sort of an island of peace. It affects us in many, many ways, and that is why we have to be an actor in this world. And I think that is perhaps a better narrative than to say we are a war project.
And it's also interesting to remember how you mentioned the peace project. The peace is something we all need to collectively work on because it can be quickly taken away from us. And this is something, it's a project. So we need to keep working on it. I think looking at the clock, we have time for just one more question. So let's have the gentleman at the back there. He's been waiting for a while now. And then we will be closing the session.
Thank you so much. I'm writing my thesis on this topic, and I'm concentrating on NATO-EU cooperation in general. My question is, has the Russian aggression against Ukraine reinvigorated this cooperation? Has the EU and NATO moved closer together? And what has changed since St. Malo Declaration, when this was all formalized gradually?
Yes, it's a very good question, a very interesting one also, because I think it has. And if you look in the past, the EU was one entity, NATO was another one. They were not really interested in one another. NATO thought that EU was extremely complicated and shouldn't engage in anything that had to do with defense or military. And the EU did try to get a little bit of that piece of that cake, but not very successfully. And I think we're now in a completely different place. And I think it has to do with, of course, the geopolitical circumstances, but it also has to do with people in leading positions acknowledging the importance to cooperate. So the fact that Mark Rutte became the Secretary General in this time of war, coming from a position, he'd been 14 years Prime Minister of the Netherlands, he'd been in all European Council meetings in all these 40 years, he understands the European Union. And the other way around, Ursula von der Leyen, former defense minister from a country that has really changed its attitude towards defense and security, also sees the importance of NATO. And I have seen many meetings now where, NATO is, the Secretary General himself is represented at the Foreign Affairs Council, for instance. And the other way around, the European Union, the HRVP, or the President of the Commission attends the meetings of NATO. And when Europe went to Washington, the Secretary General of NATO was there side by side with Ursula von der Leyen. So they're also displaying the unity. And there is a Commissioner for Defense who is actively looking for ways to help NATO to achieve its goals, especially on the industrial side and the defense industry production. So this is really hopeful. I'm not saying that we're there yet, but it's really the first time that you see this intense will to cooperate between those two institutions.
And I think our time here has come to an end. I really do hope that you all enjoyed your lunch, but also enjoyed the view. But most importantly, that you enjoyed this conversation, because this is the discussion that I think is very important to have, especially in the current climate and with the conflict that is ongoing, which all sides are trying, coalition sides are trying to close and possibly work towards peace, because, as you said, it's always a peace project. Thank you so much for joining all today. Kajsa Ollongren, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense from the Netherlands, was my guest today. Absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your insight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Claudia.